Question 5. Scientists. Earth's average annual temperature has increased by about 0.5 degrees Celsius over the last century.
All right, so we just have a fact here about temperature increase on Earth. Not a not so fun fact, I would say, about rising temperatures, that it's increased 0.5 degree Celsius.
And this
That's
is where you
it.
also have to leave your LSAT not or not LSAT knowledge, your outside knowledge at the door. Because like you may know that is I have to imagine it's not 0.5 degree Celsius. Like that might be high, it might be low. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
But for our purposes, it's 0.5 degree, not more, not less. And this is just a fact. There's nothing to argue with here. Like you, whether I mean, you goofballs if you like don't think that's real, separate issue. But either way, that is the fact. They could tell you that it's cooled down 10 degrees, which obviously we know it all hasn't. If they had said that, you would still have to take that as gospel for our purposes. So I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, cool, 0.5 degree Celsius hotter. Let's see what's up with that. So they tell us this warming is primarily the result of the buildup of minor gases in the atmosphere, blocking the outward flow of heat from the planet.
Okay. And just for context for anyone listening, that's the end of the argument. It just stops there. There's nothing more. And right away, like, okay, I guess, but there's no evidence for this. Or they just kind of drop this. Like, this is the explanation for the warming, that okay, there's been this buildup of gases in the atmosphere. Which of course, in the real world, that's often what how we understand like global warming with greenhouse gases or whatever. But it doesn't matter what we know or think, again, in the real world. That also doesn't care what you know. In this situation, like, okay, it could be true that the buildup of minor gases is causing this temperature increase, but it might not be. We don't know either way. They just kind of leave us hanging with this,
Yeah, and
and
this is
there's no
where
evidence.
I would want to come in and be a skeptic with a million different reasons as to why. Because, Earth is warming. That isn't premise. We
Mhm.
cannot argue with that. But when they say it's because of the gases, I'm like, is it though? Do you have proof of that? Is it
Yeah,
possible that they're like, what if everyone has just turned on their heater all year round and the cumulative effect of everyone running their heater has warmed the Earth? Probably not real. Also, theoretically, could have warmed the Earth. What if the sun got hotter? Like, obviously ridiculous, but theoretically, that could have led to more stuff. It's also possible like the ozone layer broke down, which would be like our kind of like insulation breaking down as opposed to building up. I don't know why that would lead to heat, but I'm not a science nerd. I'm an LSAT person trying to be a lawyer and just come up with any reason why this could be wrong. Maybe volcanoes
yeah.
went off. I don't know. Like there's just so many.
Because it's just this last century. It's a specific time frame too. So like, even if maybe, I don't know, over a longer time frame, this has been what's causing an increase. Although also kind of unlikely, because I feel like industrial activity that's resulted in gas buildup is a modern phenomenon.
Yeah. Well,
The
also
point is, we just don't know, right?
another nitpicky thing. What is a minor gas? I know what gases are, CO2 is gas, methane, but does
That's
minor
true.
gas only refer to other things? Like what if CO2 is a major gas? And that's
I would feel like CO2
like,
is a major gas. Like the
yeah,
gases that we
so
hear about, maybe it's like, I don't know, maybe they're referring to like something like hydrogen or helium. I don't know. But the thing is, we don't know. Like, we don't have that definition. Um, so even if it's true that maybe the buildup of major gases is the primary source of warming, that doesn't necessarily mean minor gases. There's just a lot of information we just don't have here
yeah.
that doesn't
The
establish
other
anything.
important thing to notice is like we're not trying to be scientifically accurate here. We do not need to actually be stating like what is realistic. We're just coming with what are actual reasons that could lead to it not being the buildup of minor gases. Because whether this is a weakener, strengthener, flaw, assumption, whatever question type they give us, it's always going to come back to kind of like what was the missing piece here. And the missing piece is that we have literally no evidence that it's the gases, which is tricky because from outside knowledge, we know that this probably is the reason why we have a buildup of warmth, but they have not established that here. And this is all the evidence we have for our purposes. So, yeah, let's see what they ask us. So they say, which one of the following, if true, would count as evidence against the scientist's explanation of Earth's warming? So yeah, we're being
Okay.
asked to weaken his argument. Like what his explanation is minor gases. What would destroy that explanation?
Yeah, literally, basically, some of the things we mentioned, it's a little bit unclear exactly what they'll choose to give as evidence that suggests that the gases are not what's causing this temperature increase. But at the same time, it just takes literally anything that suggests minor gases are not responsible for this temperature increase. So anything that would do that for us, suggesting maybe something
Yeah.
else that is responsible for the increase, that would do it. Um,
And yeah, another thing that's worth noting is because often on these ones, they're going to give you tangential stuff that seems like it matters, but it does not. So, like, what matters here is basically, are minor gases causing the warming of Earth? That is it. That's all we care about. If they start talking about like some of them come from cows, whereas others come from factories, I would be like, okay, I don't care where they're coming from. I just care what effect they are
they're
having
causing it.
on the Earth's temperature. So, because they have these, I'd say, superficially tempting answers to the un-LSAT prepped person, but it just does not matter. Which brings us to A, which says only some of the minor gases whose presence in the atmosphere allegedly resulted in the phenomenon described by the scientist were produced by industrial pollution.
And this is exactly what you're referring to here. Like, okay, but even if it is just some of them, then it still could presumably have this effect. It doesn't have to be all of these minor gases. It could still result in it. And then it also says here, produced by, yeah, industrial pollution, like the source. Again, we don't care where these gases are coming from. They've never talked about this, I don't think. Yeah, they've never
Yeah,
talked
like
about
who cares?
industrial
It's just
pollution.
what we care about is like, are the minor gases the cause? Is like, here's where they come from. I'm like, yeah, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the source of the gases. We're talking about the effect of them. So, and then even if we did care about where they come from, which we don't, but even if we did, only some is so soft. It's like, okay, some of them do, but some of them don't. So, like, who cares? So,
Yeah, it's just
because
so
Madeline
vague.
was kind of focusing in on that first one, if I identified, I couldn't focus in on the other. They're both correct. I mean, well, they're both valid reasons why this is wrong. Like, it's wrong for multiple reasons. And it's like I would say both of these are equally damning. That just like sink this answer. Like, neither of these can be justified. Okay, that brings us to B, which says most of the warming occurred before 1940, while most of the buildup of minor gases in the atmosphere occurred after 1940.
Okay, so this is giving us some new information that to me suggests that the minor gases are not causing this warming because the warming occurred in the first half of the century, but these gases, were built up in the latter half of the century. So if there's this disconnect in the timeline where the warming happened before the gases that are allegedly causing the warming, then how can the gases be causing the warming if the warming came first? So this to me seems pretty compelling. What's interesting about this answer choice is, and this is I think common in questions like this, is they don't necessarily handhold you through the answer choice or spell it out for you. Like it's on us to realize that this information is implying that the gases are not causing the warming. They don't literally say the gases are not causing the warming. What it's implied because the warming came first and the gases came later. But we have to make that connection. And that sometimes can be this one's not like too bad, but sometimes in especially more challenging questions, the correct answer, it's often the implication of what they're literally saying that will weaken it. They don't handhold us necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it really is like what Madeline hit on, which is that this timeline, if you think through it, it pretty clearly demolishes this argument, saying like, hey,
Mhm.
the warming came before the gases. Hence, how could the gases possibly cause the warming? Like, if thing one causes thing two, but thing one only occurred after thing two, thing one better have a time machine because otherwise there's just no way to have this causal relationship. Now, you have to think that through yourself, but if you do, it gets you right to B. So let's see what these other ones say. Answer choice C says, over the last century, Earth received slightly more solar radiation in certain years than it did in others.
Okay, so this one I think at surface level can seem appealing. It kind of sounds like it's giving an alternate explanation, like, oh, maybe this solar radiation is perhaps causing the warming. But there's a couple issues here. So first off, the certain years than other years, then all we know, or for all we know, it can be all things equal. like the same, right? That it just will even out. And in the last century, it's the same amount of solar radiation. There's some more in some years, less in the other. It could be the same or even less overall. We don't know. It doesn't actually really tell us anything conclusively. Another thing too is, does solar radiation necessarily heat the Earth or result in an increased temperature? I think it's likely, arguably it's a fair assumption, but it's also maybe not necessarily true. We don't know how that works either.
Yeah. Well, I don't have as much of an issue with solar radiation.
Yeah.
I think we can read that as largely
Yeah, I think
like
it's
like
fair.
heat. I mean, that being said, being nitpicky is good, but like the bigger issue is people often, I think, misread. See, I was saying over the past century, we got more sun than last century, but that's
Yeah.
not what it means. What it says is in certain years, we got more sun than in other years. So it's
Yeah.
comparing like 1939 to 1940 and saying like one of these years was cold, whereas another was hot. And that does not explain why we've had buildup over the past century, because that's just like it fluctuates just like our weather fluctuates, which does not help us. What we want to look for is like long-term trends and talk
Yeah.
about climate, whereas C is just talking about the weather. And it's like, yeah, the weather, some days are hot, some days are cold. Like,
Yeah, for all we know, then it's over the last century has been the same. There's been no like trend change.
yeah, exactly. All right, so that brings us to D, which says volcanic dust and other particles in the atmosphere reflect much of the sun's radiation back into space before it can reach Earth's surface.
Okay, so to me, this is suggesting like a cooling effect. If it's reflecting the sun's, here we are with, I guess, the sun's radiation, which I guess is, yeah, that could equate to heating the Earth. But if it's reflecting back before it can reach the Earth's surface, to me, that again suggests a cooling effect, which, if anything, then would strengthen our claim for the minor gases being responsible for the warming, because it's not, Dia is suggesting it's not going to be the solar radiation, it's not going to be extra heat from the sun.
Yeah.
It's being reflected back.
Yeah, we would have less radiation getting into Earth's like atmosphere, and hence with less sun, we would have less heat. So D is relevant in that it does speak to the cause of Earth's warming. But if anything, it would strengthen the idea because it's eliminating volcanic dust and other particles. So yeah, it's just, if anything, this would lead to Earth being cooler, which is a problem because we're trying to explain why it's hotter for some reason other than minor gases. And then E says the accumulation of minor gases in the atmosphere has been greater over the last century than at any other time in Earth's history.
And I think this one again arguably strengthens, not particularly well, because we don't know how temperature increases have compared in other centuries. Um, so we don't know. Maybe in prior centuries there also were temperature increases, and so it's still kind of inconclusive. But if anything, this is going more towards a strengthened direction, because it's like, oh wait, the gases are a big deal, like, and the temperature has increased. But again, we don't know. In prior centuries the temperature could have increased as well, so again, we still don't necessarily have that causal connection, but it's certainly not weakening it.
Yeah, if anything, it would be a strengthener because it's saying this kind of gas, this whole warming connection is in fact, well, I guess we're just really emphasizing the gas aspect of it, saying that there is
Yeah.
a gas. We know there was warming, hence we have a correlation. Now,
Yeah.
correlation is not causation, and Madeline makes a good point of we're not really comparing this to the warmth of any other centuries, because maybe we have hotter centuries in the past, which would make this even more confusing. But
Mhm.
it definitely doesn't weaken it. So we can get rid of E, and at this point, pretty confidently go with B. There's nothing else that really hits.